Okay, here's what I've got for the new layout for the ad form. It's bothered me for a long time that the relationship, that it doesn't really reflect SARF well, and as SARF is getting clearer in my head, that's symptom, anxiety, relationship functioning, and how a relationship subdivides into parts. I've wanted to bring this form into alignment. So another thing I've wanted to do is get it to align with who, what, when, where, how. But it turns out this, an ad form for bone theory is just really complicated. And it's never quite aligned with who, what, when, where, how. And once I landed on this organizational structure, that seems possible. So that's cool. So anyway, the big change is that everything always has, the first big change is that every data point, every event always has one person it pertains to, one actor or something. I need a word for that. I'm not sure if that's right, but so one person. And that's kind of important, even though for triangles you can have giant political triangles and stuff, and it's very difficult to get this right. So, but making it one person, it solves a lot of other problems that I won't get into. So the husband does something, and then you've got, this is the new event type menu. And this new format comes from realizing that, before I had all these events in here, but instead of variable shift, I had all of the relationship symbols. So I'd have conflict, toward, and away, things like that. But that's not the right taxonomy here. And so I changed it so that, one of the reasons I had to rearrange this a few times, because I started building it out, I added a relationship field, and then it didn't make sense, along with symptom, anxiety, and functioning, and then it kind of messed up a few other things. And so I realized that you'll never have a relationship shift necessarily, or a variable shift, when you're adding these other event types. These event types are really context. It doesn't really make sense to say anxiety went up for someone when they were born. So, but it would make sense that maybe they went up for some other people. So anyway, when you pick these types, these are, and then the next thing I realized is that most all of these types are really pair bond events. And, thinking it through and rewriting this thing again, I realized that if you change the actor for birth in particular and adopted to be the person having the child or adopting the child, then a lot of other things fall into place, and I won't explain why, but that enabled me to do who, what, when, where, how. So for example, so the flip in thinking here is when you're talking about a birth, you've got to put in the parent, optionally the spouse. That has some disadvantages, but let's just say, the mother or wife in this family. Okay, so the wife had a birth, logically it makes sense. There's other implications that cascade through this, like, when you add somebody here and they don't exist on the diagram yet, you're just trying to set a child's birthday, you're going to get it's going to add the parents for those. But anyway, so it's the person having the birth, it's the person doing the adoption, it's the person who's dying, the person who's bonding, marrying, separating, divorcing, moving. But it does alter the fields here to match. So for birth and adopted, you get spouse and child. And that's how it's going to set up. That's how it's going to know which pair bond to set up, for example. And then for bonded, married, separated, divorced, you just get the spouse. Those are pair bond events here. So, you know, the form is a lot cleaner now with this layout, which is kind of nice. And then death is just that one person, because that's unique like that. It only pertains to that one person who's dying. Okay, so the variable shift one now looks like this. The goal was to have SARF, symptom, anxiety, relationship, functioning. Symptom, anxiety, and functioning are all still the same. They're just up, down, same values. But relationship is much more complicated. Relationship has all these different categories. So this is where all the other symbols went. A lot of thinking had to go into this, actually, because of how the other people are related here. That I basically decided that everyone here, every one of these are symbols, always pertains to the person, the actor, but then also the mover or whatever, and some other people, because they're relationship ones. And then triangles are unique, that they also have a third set of people. So anyway, just to keep it simple to start, conflict, you've always got the other person. So it's always one person acting or moving in relation to one or more others. You know, before I could have multiple people making moves in relation to one or more others, but it causes a lot of problems internally. If you really lay this out and think about it, you'll see them all, but I won't get into them. I actually asked BT Copilot, you know, the chat tab here, because it's got all the seminal, you know, it's got Kerr's book and Bowen's book. And I asked it some questions like, what is the right way to track this kind of stuff, just to see what it would say. And it made some good arguments. I saved it in a file somewhere. It made some good arguments, actually, that, you know, really you should really be tracking one person doing things in relation to multiple others, even though sometimes triangles, for example, are going to have multiple people, you know, all reacting at the same time. I don't know. But you just can't capture every edge case, and, you know, maybe I'll find that this isn't a good, maybe I do need multiple people here. But, you know, when you've got multiple actors or movers and you've got multiple people on the other side, you've got to make, that multiplies the number of dyadic symbols you're adding. So it's just one actor, one mover. And then you can have any number of people for the other end. So if I add in wife and nonprofit member who happens to be in this diagram, you know, I'm not going to do this right now, but if I add those in, it will add one conflict symbol between the husband and each one of those two people. So that's pretty cool. And then I got into triangles, and I just had to think this through a ton, but really triangles are unique. Triangles and cutoff, actually. Yeah, so I'll do triangles first. Triangles, I had to add another field, and then I add these labels. So the husband's doing the acting. Triangle to inside means, you know, a person making an inside move in relation to another inside. So wife. I gotta fix that. Anyway, wife in relation to whoever, let's say the nonprofit member. So, and then with outside, the labels switch. So So now it's outside and inside. So I had to add a third. That's a unique relationship shift. So these are new fields. These are new fields of people that are stored on the actual event for the variable shift event. And then this triangled inside or conflict or toward or away or whatever, that's what's going to show up in the timeline in the graph. And then cutoff, I thought about for a little while. You know, a lot of these, some of these symbols, cutoff distance, reciprocity, which is overfunctioning and underfunctioning. And actually, by the way, I did add those as well because it depends on who's doing the overfunctioning or underfunctioning. And the symbol's the same on the diagram. But conflict, distance, the reciprocity symbols, projection are, they really are pair bond events. They are implicated in symptom development. Bowen wrote about them that way. I think Kerr wrote about them that way. They really matter the most that way, although people find them useful for for any relationship. And cutoff is also meant to be to the parents. It's a child cutting off to the parents because it has a lot more salience when you do that. Siblings cut off, that's true. Friends cut off, but in Bowen theory, there's a primacy of cutoff from child to parents, and then also the anxiety binding mechanisms, which is conflict, distance, reciprocity, and projection. Being between the parents and how that impacts the next generation. So I originally had cutoff where I didn't have this other field, but then I just decided to add it because it keeps everything really consistent. It solves a lot of problems internally, and everybody uses cutoff, outside the pair bond. So anyway, I think that's the main difference. It's who, what, when, where, how. I'll clear it out. Who, what, when, where, how. The add form is nice and clean because these don't need help text, which is pretty cool. I hope I should be able to make it so that when you edit an event, you get the same form. Right now that's too complicated. It's got the old edit form, and so hopefully that'll work. But anyway, that's pretty cool. And then one last tidbit, I think it's going to be possible to have AI arrange the diagram, because arranging the diagram is very, very complicated to do it based on rules, like an algorithm with code. But it should be possible to automatically arrange people. That'll be an interesting challenge, but not a huge one. Anyway, that's what I've got.